evidence.
Yes, exactly. Attention turned to where John O'Keefe was found, what the scene looked like, and what the medical experts concluded about his injuries and cause of death.
So remind us, where exactly was he found?
On the front lawn of 34 Fairview Road, the Albert House, he was lying face up in the snow. Observers noted visible head injuries and, obviously, signs of exposure to the extreme cold.
What did the prosecution's medical examiner say caused his death?
The official cause of death was listed as hypothermia freezing to death, but the ME also testified he had blunt force trauma to his head, 2 black eyes. Injuries, they said, were consistent with being hit by a vehicle, like Karen Reed's SUV.
So hypothermia was the cause, but the head injury was a major factor.
Right. The ME argued the head injury likely contributed significantly. Maybe he was knocked unconscious or dazed, couldn't seek shelter, and then succumbed to the cold. That was their take.
And the defense, predictably, had a different medical interpretation.
They did. They brought in their own forensic pathologist. This expert argued the injuries weren't actually typical for a pedestrian hit by a car.
What did their expert think caused the injuries?
They suggested the injuries were more consistent with maybe a fall or even some kind of physical fight or assault, potentially happening inside the house.
Implying his body might have been moved outside after the injury.
That was the strong implication, yes. And they bolstered this by pointing out the lack of physical evidence you might expect from a car strike.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, crucially, they emphasized that investigators found no blood, no hair, no human tissue on the outside of Karen Reed's SUV. If she hit him hard enough to cause those head injuries, the defense argues, wouldn't there be some trace evidence on the vehicle?
That seems like a pretty significant point for the defense. What about the snow? Any tire tracks or drag marks?
Another area the defense focused on. They highlighted that there were no clear drag marks leading to the body and no distinct tire tracks that could be definitively matched to Karen's Lexus.
Did the prosecution have an explanation for that?
They acknowledged it snowed that morning after the likely time of death, which could have covered some tracks. But the defense questioned how much snow fell and when, arguing it wasn't enough to completely erase all evidence if a car had been there.
And just to confirm, the forensic tests on Karen's SUV exterior came back negative for John's DNA.
Correct. No blood, no DNA from John O'Keefe found on the outside of her vehicle. That's a major pillar of the defense's argument against the hit-and-run theory.
Now, what about the Albert house itself? Was it treated as a crime scene right away?
This is a huge point of contention. No, it wasn't. Police didn't secure the house or do a full forensic sweep inside in the immediate aftermath.
Why is that significant?
Because the defense argues that crucial evidence inside the house might have been missed, overlooked, or even cleaned up because investigators failed to treat it as a potential primary scene from the start. By the time they did go back to look closely, hours or even days had passed.
So the defense is saying the initial investigation was flawed right from the beginning.
Absolutely. Fundamentally flawed is their argument. They suggest this failure to secure the house points to incompetence, or potentially something worse.
Did anyone nearby see or hear anything that night?
No direct eyewitnesses to the key events. But some neighbors did report hearing voices, maybe arguing, and a dog barking late that night. The defense suggests this could indicate activity at the Albert house around the critical time, but it's not definitive proof of anything specific.
And the investigators themselves. The defense has questioned their actions too.
Definitely. They repeatedly suggested investigators zeroed in on Karen Reed almost immediately, maybe because it was the simplest explanation, and failed to properly investigate other possibilities, especially what might have happened inside 34 Fairview.
Didn't the lead detective admit something about interviews?
Yes. Under oath, the lead detective, Michael Proctor, admitted that nobody who was inside the Albert house that night was interviewed by police that same night John's body was found.
Wow. That does seem odd, doesn't it? If there's a body on the lawn, wouldn't you talk to the people in the house right away?
You'd think so. And the defense is using that admission to strongly suggest either incompetence or, again, maybe a deliberate choice not to look too closely at what happened inside, perhaps because of who was there.
So, putting the crime scene and medical evidence together, where does that leave us?
It leaves us with conflicting stories. The physical evidence doesn't slam dunk the prosecution's car accident theory, especially with the lack of DNA on the SUV. But it also doesn't definitively prove an assault happened inside the house and the body was moved.
Two competing narratives, basically.
Exactly. And the jury is left trying to piece together which version the available evidence, or lack thereof, supports more strongly. It's still very much up in the air.
This defense narrative of a flawed, maybe even biased investigation? It seems central. Let's unpack those allegations of a potential cover-up and the role of law enforcement connections more.
Right. This is really the core of the defense strategy, planting that seed of reasonable doubt by suggesting the investigation itself wasn't impartial. They're hinting that maybe officers protected their own.
Remind us about the key players and their connections again. The Alberts. Proctor.
Okay, so Brian Albert owns the house, 34 Fairview. He's a Boston police officer. His brother, Chris Albert, also Boston PD. And then Michael Proctor, who was the lead state police detective assigned to investigate John O'Keefe's death. He's friends with the Alberts and was apparently at or connected to the house that night too.
Okay, so you have multiple police officers connected to the house where the body was found, and one of their friends is leading the investigation. That certainly looks like a potential conflict.
It absolutely raises eyebrows, and the defense is leaning heavily on that. Their theory essentially is maybe something happened to John inside that house, an argument, a fight, an accident, whatever, and instead of a full investigation, the police involved, maybe consciously or unconsciously, circled the wagons to protect the Alberts and Proctor.
And what specific investigative actions or inactions are they pointing to as evidence of this potential cover-up?
Well, number one, not treating the house as a crime scene immediately. Finding a body on the lawn and not securing the house seems unusual to many. Number two, the delay in interviewing anyone who was inside the house that night.
While Karen Reed was focused on very quickly.
Right. She became the prime suspect almost instantly, while potential witnesses or even suspects inside the house weren't formally questioned for some time.
What about the digital evidence in this context?
That plays in too. John O'Keefe's own phone data, remember, apparently showed his last known location inside 34 Fairview. And then you have the huge inconsistencies around Jen McCabe's timeline and that 2:27 a.m. Google search, which the defense argues she made long before she claimed to know John was missing.
And Detective Proctor himself has been heavily scrutinized.
Oh, yeah. The defense has gone after him hard, accused him of tunnel vision, failing to explore other leads, not properly documenting evidence, and constantly highlighting his personal ties to the Alberts. They've also mentioned missing or incomplete investigation notes attributed to him.
So are they saying outright this was a conspiracy, a deliberate frame-up?
They haven't quite gone that far, explicitly accusing specific people of a coordinated conspiracy. It's more subtle.
Yeah.
They're suggesting serious negligence, maybe willful blindness, perhaps obstruction, painting a picture where the investigation was steered away from the Alberts and towards Karen Reed because of those internal connections and loyalties.
And part of this strategy involves highlighting who hasn't testified. Right.
That's a huge element. As things stand, none of the key people who were actually inside 34 Fairview that night, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, maybe others, have taken the stand. The prosecution didn't call them. Will the defense? We don't know yet. But their absence leaves this massive hole in the story of what happened inside that house.
It's like a missing piece of the puzzle.
A potentially crucial missing piece.
Oh.
And the defense wants the jury to wonder why it's missing.
So the overall defense picture is one of institutional loyalty, law enforcement protecting their own, and Karen Reed becoming the convenient scapegoat.
That's the narrative they're weaving, absolutely. That friendships and professional ties within law enforcement might have compromised the investigation from the very beginning, leading to a miscarriage of justice where Karen Reed is wrongly accused.
So we're back to these two starkly different stories facing the jury.
Exactly. A tragic accident caused by an angry girlfriend versus a potential cover-up shielding people connected to law enforcement. The jury has to decide which story holds more water, who they trust more.
And this whole drama isn't just playing out in the courtroom, is it? It's blown up into a national obsession.
It really has. It's got all the elements, hasn't it? Small town secrets, police intrigue, conflicting stories. It's like a real-life Netflix thriller, and people are hooked.
Let's just quickly boil down the two core narratives again. Prosecution.
Karen Reed was drunk, angry, jealous. She hit John O'Keefe with her car, left him there in the cold, then tried to cover her tracks. They point to the car damage, the cell data, as they interpret it, Google search at 6:24 a.m., and witness testimony like Jen McCabe's initial account. Defense. Karen Reed is being framed. Something happened to John inside 34 Fairview involving people there. His body was moved outside. The police botched the investigation, either through incompetence or deliberately, to protect their friends and colleagues, zeroing in on Karen as the easy target. They point to the lack of DNA on the car, the conflicting phone data, the 2:27 a.m. search, witness inconsistencies, and the investigators' connections.
It feels like the trial has become about more than just Karen Reed's guilt or innocence.
It really has. It's morphed into this kind of public trial of the justice system itself, particularly local law enforcement. People are watching intensely, questioning whether the system is fair, whether powerful people get treated differently.
And the public reaction seems incredibly polarized.
Massively. You've got this huge vocal group supporting Karen Reed, seeing her as a victim of a corrupt system. They protest outside the courthouse. They dissect every detail online. She's become a sort of folk hero to them.
So it's gone beyond true crime into this commentary on citizen-police relations, maybe.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's tapped into a pre-existing vein of skepticism and tension about law enforcement accountability, and this case has become a real flashpoint.
Looking forward in the trial, what are the really key things for people following along to watch out for?
Well, the biggest question mark is still, will anyone from inside the Albert house testify? Particularly Brian or Nicole Albert. Their testimony, or lack thereof, could be huge. And then ultimately it comes down to how the jury interprets reasonable doubt. Is there enough doubt about the prosecution's case, given all the questions raised by the defense?
What happens after the verdict? What are the potential consequences either way?
Okay, if it's a not guilty verdict, expect immense scrutiny on the investigation. Probably internal affairs reviews, maybe civil lawsuits against the police or the town. Possibly even calls for a new investigation into what did happen that night. For Reed's supporters, it would be total vindication.
And if it's guilty?
Well, for the prosecution and maybe O'Keefe's family, it might bring some closure. But for that large group that believes she's innocent or that the investigation was flawed, a guilty verdict would likely just fuel more suspicion, more questions about whether the full truth ever came out. The controversy probably wouldn't just disappear.
So, boiling it all down, what are the really big lingering questions at the heart of all this?
It forces you to ask, how well do we really know the people around us? How much can we trust institutions, especially when they investigate themselves? And what happens when the system designed to find truth and deliver justice is itself put on trial in the court of public opinion?
And amidst all the legal arguments and public debate, it always comes back to John O'Keefe and the fact that we still don't have a universally accepted account of how he died.
Exactly. And without that clear, undeniable truth, this cloud of doubt, this uncertainty, it just seems destined to hang over this case for a long, long time.
So this deep dive, drawing on your sources, it really just hammers home how incredibly complex this Karen Reed situation is. There are just no easy answers here, are there?
Not at all. It's a textbook example of how a seemingly simple event, a death in the snow, can spiral into this maze of conflicting evidence, questionable actions, and deeply personal narratives. It's just tangled.
And it really forces you to think about how evidence gets interpreted, how much weight you give to witness testimony versus, say, digital data, and maybe most importantly, how crucial the integrity of the initial investigation is.
Absolutely. And for you, listening, it really pushes you to weigh those competing narratives. Based on everything presented so far, which story feels more plausible? Which account lines up better? Or has fewer holes? It challenges your own process of deduction.
And clearly, what we've covered here is just scratching the surface. There are layers upon layers to this.
Oh, definitely. We'd really encourage you to keep following the case as it develops. Look deeper into your source material. Try to piece together your own understanding. It's an ongoing story.
Right. And maybe that leads us to a final thought to leave you with. In a case like this, so full of doubt and competing theories, is the search for the absolute definitive truth maybe just as important or even more important than the verdict itself.
And regardless of how the jury decides, what does this whole saga ultimately tell us about our own assumptions? About justice, about accountability, and about the dynamics within our own communities. Something to really think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.